mailed to us last week, and we'll work our way through that.
Well, and it may not be as important to record this, but this is the last of the draft sections other than definitions. So and I've got, almost ready a draft zoning map.
Okay?
Which will be exciting, because it's
Yeah.
obviously gonna look different than what you have now.
Oh, yeah.
So hopefully at the regular April meeting, we will have the complete draft of a draft zoning ordinance with all the red line changes,
Okay?
yay, and a zoning map.
Sweet.
So we'll go through that and see what we can get through in that one meeting, and then go from there, but provided that we're on a good shape, we can kind of talk about what we want to do for public engagement before the adoption.
Right.
So
Okay.
we're on that back slope there, heading towards a finish.
Good.
She'll probably pour it on.
That's good.
Yep. Of course,
Okay, we're good? Go ahead.
of course, now we're waiting to do, we wait till this fun time to deal with signs. And, Joshua, I know this is one that you and I have had several talks about, and I think I've multiple times warned you that this is where a lot of things are gonna change. One, because I'm still not sure I understood all of the calculations that are in the code.
I don't know where they came up with all, it was horrible, it's horrible.
Well, I try to use what I thought you were trying to get at with them to form a simpler way of getting what you're trying for. Or also, I tried to focus on making it easy to administer, so I'll talk about some of that. But the other reasons, and I think I've mentioned this before, the signs had to change was, you didn't have a terrible much of it because you didn't have a lot of sign content-based stuff, but any community cannot, to most extents, cannot regulate based on the message of the sign. So you can't have, you had some, I think, exceptions for like political signs that had to be up, so many days before the election and down so many days after. Long before this 2015 case that made everybody's problematic, Ohio actually had said that's problematic because political speech is not just about elections. And so you won't see references to political signs, to real estate signs, to anything based on message. Here's where it's a little bit of a gray area because 2022 now, so almost 2 years ago, the Supreme Court of the United States actually ruled in a case that gave us some clarification and said, well, you can kind of. We don't consider it content regulation if you kind of glance at a sign and you say it's on premise or off premise. So, and it was a billboard case. Not all off premise signs are billboards. Think about your community event signs. Every time you put a community event sign in your front yard, even though it's a little temporary one, it's technically off premise. So anyways, there's a little bit of that. And the other thing that you already had a little bit of, and I kind of kept it, and unfortunately we'll have to talk to the law director about this, but there has been court cases that allowed us to have distinction between a commercial sign and a non-commercial sign. So non-commercial signs, political, religious, opinion, anything that you would say is definitely your like freedom of speech. And a commercial sign is anything like advertising services or advertising goods for sale or that type of thing. Now hiring, activities, events, sales, whatever, real estate, contractor signs, all that stuff. I have left that in here for a little bit as one of the options. The biggest place that comes into play is temporary signs. Because think about it. When you're talking about permanent signs, it's pretty easy to say, you can have a monument sign, it can be this tall, this big, and otherwise, we don't really care what the message is because we're looking at the structure. On a temporary sign, we all know this as we're going into political season, they can get a little out of hand, and now that we can't say, political signs this way or not, it's a little bit more challenging. So we'll talk about that as we go through each type. But the temporary signs is where the struggle is real. Mm-hmm. So you'll notice, I think, that there isn't a lot of references to the previous sign regulations because like I said, I used it as kind of a policy touch base of, I think I know what you're trying to get at with each of these districts, but otherwise, I just said, we're gonna start fresh. So you have a new, kind of new purpose and intent, language, which all of our chapters have. The applicability is pretty easy. So all permanent signs are gonna be subject to some kind of zoning compliance review. You know, they could go up to the building code review for the state in some cases. And then we have this list of what we call zoning compliance exceptions. We recognize these as signs, but we're not gonna require you to come in and get any kind of special review. Just stick to the rules and we're all good and okay. So this is kind of an expanded list of common signs, some of which you address in your current code, a lot of which you don't. I don't know why I had that highlighted, that's a pretty obvious one, but courts, judges, especially in bankruptcies, will often give a lot of leeway for signage that you just won't have a say in. And so, you know, if the courts tell you to have a signage, okay, you have to have it. Sign face changes, I think this is one of the comments I have, I just wanted to confirm this correct. So sign face changes, if you've got a sign structure that either has like interchangeable panels or like, you know, on a multi-tenant sign, sometimes you can pull a part of it off and pop a new business in. I read your current code is, and this, Joshua, might be an answer from you, that you don't require any kind of review for that.
Right now, if the business is staying the same and they're just doing a face change, we do not.
Okay.
We don't do any type of permitting. Should that stay the same, I could go either way on it. I wish Ron was here to comment on that a little more, but we've had, if it's a business changing and they're keeping the same, you know, shell of the sign, we'll do a new permit, because it goes along with a new certificate of zoning compliance, because we've got new occupants and all that. But we have had a couple more recently where it's like a rebranding of the company, same personnel still there, same ultimate company, but we've let them do it without. But I don't know, I can see it either way, because they're still physically removing the sign, and it's a different sign, so to speak, going in.
Well, and I will tell you this, and this is kind of why I left this as a question. The struggle is with every community. So I have some communities who are just like, yeah, we don't care. Because again, it doesn't matter if the message is, you know, Joe's Diner, and then it becomes a pet store or whatever. The structure was there. If you're just literally taking the panel out and then replacing it, and there's no other change, we don't care. But I do have a number of communities who would prefer you come in and get a permit or a certificate of some sort, because they're just using it to track businesses, particularly for income tax. So they're like, okay, well, if we just make it universal that any sign change has to come in.
It also helps us catch businesses for the certificate of zoning compliance we currently use now, which is our kind of ticker for tracking businesses and passing that info on to income tax. But that's why I said I could see it going either way, either the way we're going now, because businesses slip in, even in a small town like this, and I don't notice it, or someone points it out, hey, did you know this is open? And then, you know, out of town people are always fine with getting whatever they need. It seems like it's more the locals are like, well, why do I gotta fill this out? Why do I gotta fill that out? Blah, blah, blah. But, so that would help, I think, you know, when a sign changed. It could help.
One of the things you could do is, this is where the fees come into play. You could have two sign permit fees. Like one is like you are not changing the structure, so we don't have to worry about measuring the height of the, you know,
Right.
You are just doing a panel change, and then maybe there's no fee to it. It's just all right. You know, that if you see that they're just removing a panel and putting it back in, but at least you've tracked it. So you could look at it that way to make it so it's not like there's a cost to it. It's just tell us what you're doing. So that may be a kind of a side thing to look at.
Right, because right now, if, like I said, if it's a new business coming in, old business moves out, takes their panels down and leaves the shell and the structure, and the new business puts their stuff in, we do require a permit because of the business change. But then essentially, when you're looking at it, it's the same thing as if that same company just pulled, you know, there's no new structure. So
Well,
that could go either way.
One of the things that I did change in here, or put some emphasis on, particularly for property maintenance, is that You can't have exposed internal elements, so they shouldn't be taking panels without putting something back in its place, even if it's just a blank panel.
Okay.
Because that, nothing looks worse than like a,
We've got a few on the west end right now, yeah.
a lot of communities do, and so that's why we're seeing a change in maintenance requirements, that you don't necessarily have to be advertising something on site, but put some kind of panel or cover it.
I
Alright.
would prefer that we at least require a permit,
Do the permit for.
because, I mean, what's the difference between changing, you know, a sign on a store versus changing a sign on a panel?
And I kinda
It's
like the
still-
different fee.
Yeah, you're still advertising the business.
Right.
Plus, I would think it would keep you in the loop of what's going on too.
Yeah,
You don't
exactly.
have that business slip in and out that, you know, well, I just changed the panel on here.
And it makes it easier overall too, to say that, you know, any type of sign change has to involve us instead of picking and choosing, cause that's when enforcement's difficult, because when I'm tracking the people down, then it's like, whoa, I thought I didn't have to do it, because, well, then we can just simply say, across the board, you gotta deal with this.
Every sign changes.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
there should be a small fee for any of it.
Right, and I like how
Any of
it's
it.
tiered, like if it's a new business putting in the new sign compared to the same business, just theirs got cracked and they're putting a new panel up, maybe that's a lesser fee. I do like that.
I'm gonna say 90% of
permits
community,
across the board.
90% of the people, communities that I worked with that do have some kind of permit for these panel changes are doing it because they're just, it's more of a tracking.
Yeah,
And I think to your point, like an equal treatment, that it's a sign or change, it's some kind of sign change and we wanna know about
You
it.
get too many discrepancies where, well, exceptions, then it makes it hard to enforce stuff.
Right. Okay, I made a note of that. Number 3 here, and I might be able to zoom in a little bit more on some of this language, but number 3 is new to you. This is meant to try, again, to say, listen, we know it's signage, but we're not worried, but this is not where our worry is. So this is exempting things like drive-through signs, signs on gas pumps or whatever that are meant to be seen by a user and is not trying to attract attention from the street. And so, you know, vending machines, everything's got a little bit of signage on it now, where you could really have a headache trying to regulate the number of signs out there. So this is just trying to set out that the focus is on signage that's meant to be kind of viewed from a street or a public area. Internal signs, signs that are in kind of the inside parks or inside, you know, the scoreboards and stuff, if it's meant to be seen by the internal thing, again, not kind of applied here. Flags, interestingly enough, you don't think of them as signs, but they are a message that to court systems are considered a sign. So you really don't address how you would deal with them. So I just threw this in as this has kind of been a best practice or a start of a best practice. So this basically says any lot could have a single flagpole with a flag on it, or it plus 3, you know, the kind that you pop on a post, or you could do 4 on a post, whatever. That you could do that. Do some communities allow more? Sometimes they'll say in an industrial or a commercial one, you can have 2 or 3, or public facilities, you know, because sometimes industries or sometimes like hospitals or whatever will have multiple ones, whatever. We can add to this. I just want to point out that this is something, again, we aren't requiring them to get a sign permit. Now, if they put a pole in, a flagpole, they might have to get a permit from a building standpoint, depending on how big it is, but this is just saying, we recognize that, you know, this is a form of a message, and we're gonna say, okay, but here's your limitation. So I guess my real question is, do you understand this? But also, you know, do you want to have any provisions for certain districts to have more flagpoles? And by the way, just, I'm gonna preempt to this because these flag posts that are in the wall are the ones that tend to have all the lovely obscene signage right now that everybody asks me about. And the answer is no, you can't regulate that language.
oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's only gonna get worse.
We had an instance of that after the last presidential election over on Tuscarawas Avenue.
Well, and a lot of communities are having it continue to be a problem, and it is the one thing where I've seen every attorney I've worked with agree on. Just can't really do anything about it.
Yeah.
Don't understand why. I mean, we regulate public airwaves, but whatever. But I bring that up in this point is that we are not trying to say what the message on these flags are. In fact, these flag posts, if they want to do, you know, a different country, if they want to have a, you know, welcome sign, whatever it is, they can have whatever message they want. So any thoughts on the flag poles in particular?
Not really, because I mean, I've not had that as an issue come up since I've been here, really, so limiting them or a max number or anything, I haven't really. It's more the advertising flags that people are sticking in the ground that stick up or the ones that we need some clarification on, because we've got a couple companies where they'll put like 20 of them right in the,
Oh, yeah.
and then
Yeah.
they don't want that counted towards their sign, and our current sign ordinances, it's a gray area, do we count those, do we not?
Yeah.
Then they'll tell us they're gonna bring them in every night, and they don't, so it's just been something we've kind of been, well, we'll figure that out and enforce it when the new zoning code goes in.
Well, and by the way, just so you know, and we'll get to this in the point, if there's like a plan unit development in the future and they want to adjust the rules of the sign within that plan unit development, they could. So if they come in and say, hey, we want to have 3 flag poles or something, there's a process in that you would be able to adjust sign regulations for it. So, you know, this is just for the average lot.
Mhm.
Okay. Number 8, a single wall sign mounted flush, 2 square feet in area. This replaces what you allow now for home occupation. So you allow a small wall plaque. Again, we can't limit it to just home occupations, but also it's not a big sign. And so we've just said, if you have a dwelling, you can have 2 square feet of sign. It could be your name, it could be your address, it could be whatever. Go ahead, home occupation. So that replaces your home occupation sign. They would not have to come and get a certificate for that.
Our current one actually got changed to like 6 or 8 feet, but it's not shown in the property. There was an ordinance about 2 years ago that bumped that 2 square,
That's a bigger sign. I mean, that's a real estate sign thing.
and it's either 6 feet or 8 feet for home occupation, and it,
Well, now here's the other thing, and we'll talk about this, but that's a good example of the way we had to change temporary sign regulations, because we can't say it's gotta be real estate or it's gotta be this or that. One way or another, as long as they're maintaining in good condition, they would have the ability to have some kind of temporary sign. So if they got a nicer version of a real estate sign that had their home, I mean, they still would be able to do that
okay.
through the temporary sign provisions. So if they wanted to do, but that would be freestanding.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, that's a general question.
Yeah.
Is this all applicable in all districts, or just residential or commercial? What
Yeah.
section does this apply?
That is a good question. So this section that we're talking about now is applicable to all districts. When we get in the next sections, we will break it down, so there are certain types of permanent signs that are allowed in residential, certain types of permanent signs. These are all kind of, like I said, the dwelling, you know, kind of thing is a very small thing that we're not worried about what district is. You can just do that without a certificate. Flags, any district can have those number of flags. So this is, we're just saying these, we recognize these as a form of message or sign. You just don't have to worry about coming to the city to get approval, just keep it to these rules.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Number 11, I'll highlight this, is signs on trucks, buses, or vehicles, you know, used in the normal course of a business is all fine and well. The problem, and I don't know if you've had this in New Philadelphia, the problem, and again, we could just say, we're not even gonna worry about this and just say signs on vehicles, we don't care. We're running into more and more problems where they're using this and they're putting a trailer out there and parking a trailer permanently almost with signage for the business to have some additional signage that's just not otherwise allowed. However, we've got this situation where we're like, okay, listen, we're not worried about the delivery trucks that actually have signage on it for Domino's. But the example I've used is actually Caesar's Pizza. You know, normally a delivery truck would be fine. They had a box truck, a huge box truck with Caesar's, Little Caesar's Pizza all over it, backed up into a parking space that was clearly meant to be additional signage and never moved. So what this is there's a, we'll get to it later, but basically if a vehicle sign is parked for more than 48 hours, you know, and I'm, you know, the weekends you're obviously not enforcing, that's kind of showing some intent that it's just signage. So that's how we break this out. But if it is like delivery trucks or whatever, you're not worried about it. It's really meant to give you teeth if you find somebody kind of really violating it.
We got a box truck at a carpet store on 5 Points. It's
Oh,
been
yeah.
there for years.
I keep wanting to take a picture of that
Yeah.
sign every time I drive in.
It
I'm
looks
like,
it
this
looks
is a really
bad.
good example.
Yeah.
The other thing that I will always, I've always talked about with signs is if you, on vehicle signs in particular, if they are parked in some manner that's illegal, like let's say they're parked on grass, and you don't, I think we talked about that, and the parking's gotta be on surface area, go after them for the way they're parked. Don't worry about the signs. The
Right.
signs you get sued for your constitutional rights, not so much on the parking. So go after them first and foremost on how they're parked. And if that doesn't work, then we've got some signage. Okay. Signs installed by the city, the county, government agencies. There is some level of protection called government speech that you get because you are advertising for the big P public. So obviously traffic signs and everything that the city is, in the county is putting in for traffic and all that, those are all gonna be allowed. And then address number signs required by the city, you know, I saw the numbering requirements in Title IX or something like that, so all of that is required or allowed. So at the top of this page, 17, so here's the other tricky one, is we're not trying to get into holiday, you know, all the different holiday, Happy Easter's probably out now in front of people's houses and stuff like that. Now, of course, we're talking about signs related to like holidays. I mean, that's technically going towards a message, but I haven't found one community who's gonna go after it, so we just put it in there that signs that, I don't care which property, what district is in, you know, if it's about, you know, holidays and events, go for it. And then general maintenance, you can obviously maintain your sign without any permits. Prohibited sign types, these are specific ones that are not allowed, and this really is more about a locational thing. So obviously, if it's a sign that's a hazard or structurally unsafe, it's prohibited. You can't be applying them to utility poles, even if they say you can, but they never let you. Can't block fire escapes. Pennants and streamers we're prohibiting. Anything that moves or revolves. Balloon signs and air-activated graphics. I'll ask you this again when we get to temporary signs. Some communities want to allow people, like UDF likes to, whenever they do a grand reopening or something, they have the big milkshake balloon. And they might want to do that for 2 weeks. So I do have communities that say, you know what, if you want to have that once a year for 2 weeks, then we'll have a provision for that. So we can come back and talk about if that's a particular type of sign. Air-activated graphics is the dancing man. So anything that is actually moving, we're saying no. Balloons are secured. Number or letter H, the vehicle signs that are parked for more than 48 hours. Again, I'm going to tell you that most enforcement officers are kind of, this is a lower priority, but if somebody's like, you know, if they're really parking there for a week, then you start to get a little antsy. And then most importantly, I want to point out letter N, which is any sign that we don't specifically say, structure that we say you can't specifically have, is prohibited, unless you can defend that it's something similar. Now, this is very handy when new technology comes around. I don't have a picture of it now, but all kinds of crazy things happen. When I do a presentation on sign, like a speech on signs, I always show a picture of a car dealer that has like it looks like a carnival ride, and they put one of their vehicles on top and it spins slowly. Yeah, that's not allowed. So that would be your way of saying, no. We don't specifically allow rotating signs. All right, general regulations, this is pretty easy. This is all the general stuff that applies. Some ones, I didn't see this in your code now, but I added it, letter D. The lowest component of signs that project or are supposed to impose the project, that should be 8 feet above any finished grade of a sidewalk, over a sidewalk or pedestrian way, or, 15 feet above finished pavement. So when you have a sign that's like projecting over a driveway or something private, it's gotta be 15 feet so the vehicles can clear it. Now, more and more, in fact, with the permanently freestanding signs, I've suggested you push those into landscaping areas so you don't have this issue. But this is one of those things we have to be a little bit careful about. All signs are gonna be subject to the visibility standards. And then H, the backside of all permanent signs that don't contain a second sign face, which they almost always do, has to have something that it makes it completely enclosed. Again, going back to you shouldn't be seeing internal elements. Signs in the right of way. So obviously signs installed by the government can be in the right of way. Warning signs or traffic signs, all of those kind of can be in there. Sidewalk signs, which we will talk about as temporary signs. And then the code administrator, city engineer can remove any that are unlawful in the right of way.
Does that cover hanging over the right of way too, or is that in a different section?
So we're gonna talk about that because with downtown signs, I had a question about projecting signs over a right of way. So we need to have clarification whether or not you want to allow that or not.
Because our code right now, the current one says no signs can overhang
Yeah.
the right of way, and we've got tons of them.
I know.
And we have denied, I mean.
Almost every downtown like yours would have
Right.
projecting sign because that's historically.
Since I've been on, we've stuck to the code and not allowed new ones unless they've gone through the Board of Zoning Appeals for a variance. So that's one of the main points I wanted to, are we gonna stick with what we're doing?
So
or
I
we just
suggested
say
you
no?
allow them as an option. But we can have a discussion because some will say, yeah, it can project over the right of way, but no matter what, it's gotta be like 1 foot from the curb, so it's not too close to a vehicle way.
So semi doesn't clip it or
Yeah,
something?
exactly. So I have suggested you allow that as an option, not just because you have them already, but because that's a very common sign type in a downtown. And that's really where you're gonna run into it over the sidewalk. We don't want them projecting over, even if we allow it with 15 feet over a vehicle way, really don't want them to be over a public street, but they can be over a public sidewalk. So, I will make a note though, to come back to that. Read my chicken scratch. Illumination, and I'm sorry about the cross-reference, I don't know what happened to it, but, so we do allow illumination, and yes, before anybody asks, I did talk about digital signs later, so you can have digital signs, and that's where the cross-reference went awry, but, I have provisions later on about electronic message centers, and I know that was something you do not specifically address, I know you have them, so we have addressed them. Calculations and measurements. This is a couple of pages of clarification of how things are signed. This is the one thing I could not find any guidance on how you measure signs. I didn't look, see,
For the like for the allowed signage amount?
yeah.
It's in each zone.
Well,
so
that's how you calculate how much you're allowed, but not how determining when somebody shows you a sign they want to put in, how do you determine, is that, unless it's square, that's pretty easy, but if they were to put up.
Oh, you mean with the odd shapes
like
and
how you
stuff?
actually measure the
Yeah,
sign.
Yeah, it's been.
And so there was
we've been
no,
winging it.
yeah, there was no definition of sign area, no definition of sign height, so I gave you measurements. So this is all essentially new. Sign setbacks, pretty straightforward. Sign height is traditionally measured from the base to the top of the sign. That's pretty easy. One of the things that I have kind of said here is that this has been helpful for a couple of things. So you can't create an extra berm or something to get extra height. So don't try, putting a a berm down just to get some extra height. Plus, you can't, necessarily, the filling of a hole to create a grade is permitted if you bring it up to the average grade. But the other thing is, and I was trying to think if this happens anywhere, and there might be a couple cases near the highways, but if for some reason you've got a street grade that's up high, and then there's kind of a topography thing that the lot itself is below grade, in a commercial district where you can have taller signs, this would allow you to have a slightly taller sign to use the street grade as the measuring point. So this has been kind of helpful where there's some topographical situations and especially around highways where they tend to be up, elevated above it.
And that would kind of, while you're driving, kind of keep everything in conformity, I
Yeah.
would think.
Yeah. So with sign area, because you didn't have anything to go from, I gave you what I thought was about as liberal as a provision you can have while making it easy. So basically, when somebody comes in, they are going to just show you what the sign copy area is. And so we have different examples of, for example, here in a freestanding sign, the white area is where the sign copy is. So you're not counting the post or the poles. Square's pretty easy. If you've got a sign, like a cabinet sign or something that's got a very definable background, you look at the entire background. And then if you have like the individual, we call these channel lettering or something like that, where there's no background other than the facade, you would go by the outermost points of the sign. So that's about as standard practice as you've got out there. Some communities will say whatever rectangular shape it fits in or whatever triangle it fits in or something like that. You can do that, but to be honest, I think that was done before the times of computers when they could just print out a plot and say, here's the picture of the sign, and here my computer has calculated the sign area for you. When we had to do the calculations by, hand on a site plan review, having a set polygons made things a little bit easier. So I suggest you don't worry about trying to do that. Just have them tell you how much square footage it is and show it to you. But knowing that this is how you're going to calculate it. And then the other thing I did, because you do have some bigger buildings, this is not necessarily, you don't address this now, but I do often get the question of when we have multiple signs on like one building facade, like a car dealer is a good example where they've got Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep. Is that one big sign or is that 3 different signs? And so what this is saying is, listen, if you've got 3 different individual types of sign copy that are separated by 2 feet, make it 5 feet, make it 1 foot, I don't care, but 2 feet seems to be a good rule of thumb. Then their individual sign, they're calculated separately. But if you have a whole bunch of stuff that's like grouped really close together, then you're gonna look at the larger aggregate of it. So again, I don't care, 2 feet seems to be a rule that has worked with a lot of communities. Like if it's by 2 feet away from each other, then okay, we get it. But then if you have a lot, like Starbucks coffee is a good where they have a lot of times they have the round logo and then Starbucks coffee underneath. It's all one sign. So I put this in here for your consideration. If it's helpful, you don't have to have it. Not everybody does. I've just heard more and more that this is helpful. And if I don't hear any objections, I'm going to keep on moving.
I think we should keep it, because if we don't have many now, at some point we will, we'll run into it.
Well, and again, keep in mind, and also it shows that like decorative edging and stuff we're not worried about, but for the most part, I don't think this will come into play a lot because, especially even on multi-tenant spaces, you've got, those tenants have such a kind of a small area to work with that it tends to be grouped together very closely. What this does though is keep them from being combined with their adjacent tenant. And then when you have the situation with, like I said, the bigger buildings, like Lowe's or like a car dealer where they have a lot of space to spread out on, you're not kind of penalizing them for spreading signs out. If anything, you might be like, this is great, we would rather you kind of spread it out. Facade measurements, so one of the things we will talk about is how we calculate building signage, and you already have some examples of where you calculate it by the frontage of the facade. This is just clarifying that the facade is the distance that we see straight on. So it doesn't, you don't get to be clever like in the far right one here and try to get extra frontage by like calculating the indents. We're just looking at the length of the facade. And then for multi-tenant buildings where you've got kind of clear tenant spaces, the ratios that we put in would be applied to each of those tenant spaces. So every tenant space would get their equal share of wall signage. This is an example of that. And then the other thing, again, all these cross references I'm gonna have to fix. And then this is one that you don't address this now by any means, and I'm not even sure how you would, but I'm suggesting you address it. So in commercial and industrial districts, there's usually one primary facade. So the major face of the building we're looking at, but a lot of times they have these secondary facades. It's either a corner street or like this example here where you can see like the building is oriented with the short end towards the street and the main entrances are along like an internal thing. So this is saying every building in a non-residential district can have a primary facade, and it doesn't have to be the one facing the street. And then all the other facades are secondary facades. And the reason why this is important is because when we get back to the commercial districts, I'm saying you can have signage on primary and secondary facades unless it's facing a residential district. So I was trying to be giving as reasonable as signage as possible, especially on building signage, because more communities would prefer to have much more building signage than a lot of that freestanding signage out by the road.
Right.
So I had gone with that suggestion that, do you really care if they have signage on all their secondary facades if it's not layering into a residential district? And most communities are like, no. So in the case of this far corner here, they got the lucky draw there. They're on a corner, and pretty much every facade could be visible to a street or to another commercial thing. So they could literally, if they wanted to, put signage on all. But we do have limitations on how much signage they can put on the secondary facade. So it's not like a free-for-all, but this will come back. So it's an important concept. All right, we talked about signs in the PUD district. As part of a PUD review, obviously signs could be something that is, there's probably, on a bigger PUD, there's probably gonna be some kind of sign package. So we're saying, that's fine. But if you do not address signs in a PUD approval, that's also a right. So what this is saying is if we don't address it, here are the rule of thumb so that we know how to regulate it. So if it's a single family home, you're gonna get the same signage that you could in an R1 district. If you are a public and institutional use in a PUD, you can have the same signage as a public and institutional use in a public facilities district. So Joshua, this would give you guidance on if there's no special sign package in a PUD, this is how we're gonna treat you in a PUD.
Okay.
And then this gets to your question where we start talking about signage allowed in the individual districts. So residential districts is pretty simple. There's not a lot of permanent signage in a residential district except for subdivision signs, which as far as I can tell, you have no mention of anywhere. Maybe multifamily you talk about, so I have that in here. And then the non-residential uses like churches, schools, and the like. So that's all we have to deal with here. So the first up is what we're calling signs at entrances. So this could be signs for a subdivision, all the pretty signs out front, or it could be signs for a multifamily, like a development or apartment complex or something like that. I have put in here that there has to be 20 lots or 20 dwelling units to trigger this, because you could have a multifamily building that has 4 units, and I doubt you really want them to have some kind of big signage. And 20 units is not totally unreasonable to have a small subdivision or something, and they could have a sign. This gives somebody with those developments an option. So they can put out the little monument sign out front if they want to do that, or they can have wall signs that would be 2 wall signs that could be attached to a fence It could be attached to like a decorative wall out front. It could be attached to architectural features that are out front, anything like that. Pick one or the other, you don't get both. So, first of all, let me ask the question, is 20 units the right threshold for having this type of signage?
I would say as a minimum, yeah, cause I mean, anything at less than 20 is really not that many. That's just my opinion. I mean, like you said, you don't want a subdivision sign for a street that has
A
5
private
homes on it.
street with
Yeah.
5 lots,
Right.
yeah.
But that's just my opinion.
Dick, Kelly, any comments on that?
I was pulling up my
To me,
neighborhood.
20 sounds a little bit high.
Huh?
Because in our area, 20 sounds,
That's what I pulled up. I live on Springbrook Southwest, and we've got the Spring Hill development sign. But Warner Court and Walden Court eats up about 12 different homes just there, not to mention all the ones that go in the back. So I was trying to kind of
I mean,
measure
I'm
my.
saying, I think maybe 10 or so. I mean, 20,
So there's another option, and I just did this with another community. One of the things that we've done, is we've said, if you've got like 6 to 20, you can have a sign, but it's gonna be smaller. So here, I've actually suggested a slightly larger sign than what you currently would allow for a multifamily. So I had suggested 40, it could be 36 or whatever. You could say, listen, if you've got 6 to 20 units, you could have a 20 square foot sign or something like that. So they could have something that's kind of scaled to them. And then if you've got 20 or more, you could have the larger sign. I mean, we've got that flexibility.
just somebody that's looking for the place.
Yeah.
It gives them an idea, because if they can't see the address, at least we're in the right area.
Right neighborhood.
Yeah.
So that would be an option. So like you said, down, 6 or 8, you could have a little sign.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then I want to make sure. And then this is the other big thing. So currently, technically, the only reference to permanent signs in the residential districts are, you allow 16 square foot signs, so 4x4, for non-residential uses in a residential district. So technically, your schools, and I know your schools don't make this, I've taken pictures of your school signs. Technically, right now, like schools and anything that's non-residential, residential district can only have a 4x4 sign. So because I know that's not true, and I would argue that that is very small to begin with, I have suggested something else. I have suggested that you would allow 40 square feet. Now, some communities do the magic 36, which is 6x6. Some, 36 to 40 square feet is kind of the general thing I see out there. So again, if we're talking about a freestanding sign, like a monument sign, I mean, that's not 4x10, but you're a little bit bigger than a 6x6. If you've got 2 wall signs, they're gonna be, that we're doing 2 faces there, they're gonna be slightly, on the 2 sides of the fences or something, so. I kind of leave that up to you as to what you think the right number is, but I would say that 16 square feet's a little too small.
Especially for schools. I mean, I can see churches don't have as many signs, but schools usually have a little more.
Well, to be honest, I'm trying to think of the reason I stopped and took a picture of the sign. I can think of it right here is the McDonald's sponsored sign. It's not the high school, but
That's corner of the middle school and high school. Yeah.
That's not an unusual size sign for like a church too, though, if you think about it.
Right. I'm thinking, and then usually schools have stuff on the building too, though.
Well, and I have addressed that next.
Okay.
But I'm just trying to give you a scope of
Oh,
how
this
big.
is just for the.
Yeah, so this is just for the signs for residential uses. But I'm just telling you that now, like, you allow 16 square feet, so I'm just trying to give you a frame of reference for the size. Because that's the only reference you have to permanent signs in a residential district for non-residential uses is 16 square feet. So is everybody kind of okay with 40? I mean, the only thing I would say on this, and I kind of went back and forth on this, is with the monument signs, I put 6 feet as the height. you know, that's gonna be a very long sign, which isn't unusual. You might wanna consider going up 8 on a permanent sign. That's the one, I guess, the one consideration. If you allow 40, 40 square feet, a 5 by 8, well, it's not gonna be oriented that way. It's gonna be 5 feet high, but
Well, would 8 feet be a site obstruction?
only,
Going
no,
down the
only if
street?
it was in the corners.
Okay.
And we already prohibit any signs from like that being in the corner, so most of them are not, they're not. I mean, they might put them in the corner, but as long as they keep that, like, what is it, 20-foot, triangle,
Yeah,
they'll still be able to have it in the corner and it won't be an obstruction.
Plus, you've added other setbacks, which we
Yes.
didn't have before for signs,
It's not, and they're not that much, 10 feet, but,
right?
no, for the most part, a lot of times they tend to be mid-block or mid-lot. But some do put them in the corners, but they're still gonna be, especially with your schools and churches, they tend to be set back a decent amount, and so they should have plenty of room if they wanna put it on the corner.
So
We
what
do allow for signs on both side frontages too, so,
What is the setback on the ordinance for what it's on the corner?
For the corner, we don't allow anything, like if you're standing on that corner of the property, we measure off 25 feet in each direction. That triangular area it creates, nothing over 3.5 feet tall. And then with our current ordinance, even the safety director can override anything that he sees and doesn't like,
Because
basically.
there's a few around town that,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
that's bad.
That's for anything, like
Well-
bushes, shrubs, anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's
If I
say
get a complaint-
ornamental grasses are a problem.
And they are everywhere, but as I get complaints, that's when I go, and I always, well, those have been here for 15 years. I said, well, someone's complained, it's not allowed, you gotta cut it.
We also have, we added the provision that for non-residential zoning districts, even on driveway, like a public driveway, we've got a shorter triangle, but would keep them from blocking visibility out of the driveway.
That helps prevent, people sticking their nose of their vehicle
Yeah.
out trying to see, and then
Right.
boom.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause I've
So,
seen-
yeah,
I've seen before where cities been held liable because they didn't enforce to have the sign moved back.
Well, and that's the only setbacks we have that apply to signs right now. So everyone else can put anything right on which she's put setbacks in, which I like.
Yeah.
Even if it's the middle of the property, just for,
it's 10 feet. We're not,
Right.
we're not putting it, yeah, we're not doing it. Yeah.
What about human signs, like sandwich boards and all that, is that considered temporary signs?
So we are not addressing human signs, and I'll tell you why. They are, because they're kind of painful to try to define and regulate. And I always give this example when we're talking about them, is you can go after, if like they're holding a sign, that's one thing, but I always give the example of, it gets kind of squirrely when, like, if I really love Subway and I was wearing a Subway shirt and I walked into a Subway, I'm technically not a human sign, I just have one of their shirts, right? And so it's a hard line to kind of figure out. The famous case that was down by my way is the Liberty Tax, where right about now, they'd be out there dressed as Lady Liberty, but they're not holding a sign that says Liberty Tax, they're just out there on their own private property waving. Most communities don't want to even try to define that. In part because you have the freedom of expression, so you can go out dressed however you want to dress.
It's not in the
And
public
wear whatever
road,
you
it's on-
want,
it's
whatever
on
it says.
sidewalks or.
So on sidewalks, you would go at them not because they're signage, but because they're obstructing the sidewalk. It's not about them being a human sign, that is them obstructing or blocking a sidewalk. That kind of goes to the vehicle sign, like go after it how it's parked. If somebody is blocking or obstructing a sidewalk, there are other violations you can go after, that it doesn't matter if they're a sign or not.
you address sandwich boards that
Yes.
aren't being worn on people.
I
In a different way.
don't address them being worn on people, but I do
If
address
they're just
like
sitting on the
sidewalk
sidewalk.
signs, yeah.
Right.
So,
Absolutely, yeah.
so knowing the,
You just
knowing
see
the.
me chasing a guy wearing a hamburger or something.
This is where, again, it goes to this thing, like, where do you have the resources to focus your enforcement?
One guy here, just one code guy. Just throwing that out there.
We can't put in here, Matt, whoever, I'm making up a name or something, there is no signs that are worn by Matt.
Jamie, you can come out and assist.
Okay. Some images there. So then we get to the signs for non-residential uses in residential districts. So primarily, this is going to be public service facilities, churches, schools. I'm trying to think of something else we allowed. I think we allowed like cultural facilities, which are like libraries or museums or something like that. So anything like that would be allowed to have signage. And here is where we are allowing one permanent monument sign. And then they can also have building signage similar to the public facilities district, because they're mostly gonna be public facilities. So they would, like a school would be allowed to have a freestanding sign, and they would be allowed to have building signage attached to the building. So we've cleared that all out. And here is where we're adding the new provision here. I have, for discussion purposes, included the provision that they could have electronic message signs as part of those freestanding signs. Not on the building, but out on the freestanding sign. Now, I haven't gotten to the provisions for them. There's a caveat. Regardless of where these are allowed, I've said they should be set back a certain distance from residential dwellings. So if you have like a church on a very small lot that is adjacent to residential, they're not gonna be able to get that digital signage because the brightness and illumination would be too much. But if you have a church or a school on a much larger lot and they are a really good distance from residential, then this would be allowed. So I throw that I do have communities that say none in a residential district. This is where we can play with how you want to allow these, but I want to mention that is the caveat, that they can't just have them to have them. And we do have like illumination standards and stuff like that. The other piece of this is, unlike the commercial districts, I have suggested limiting the amount of the sign that could be digital to 50%. Now, you could say we don't care, you can have it all, that's fine. But 50% would give, on a 40 square foot sign, if they want to do 40 square feet, that's 20 square feet of digital signage they could have. Which is technically more than they can have now, but I know they have them, so.
Yeah.
So thoughts on that?
Back to the small church versus large church.
Yes.
How's it written that Josh can enforce it? I mean, to say that this is not a big enough property. 70 square feet or?
So it is, let me go to this real quick, right here. So the electronic message center shall be set back a minimum of 200 feet from any lot contains a residential use. So again, if you've got, and again, I footnoted that because some communities have more distance, some have less. So this is one where if you had a large school campus or a large church campus, you're probably gonna be able to have this setback. You're gonna probably be okay.
That's pretty good distance, so.
Right. Well, and that's why 200 feet is again where I see most communities fall. But I've got communities who don't have a setback. I have communities that do 100. I have communities that go much bigger than that. So I start you off somewhere to have this discussion.
Yeah, that's good.
And that setback only applies if they're,
Digital.
contingent to, or contiguous to a residential property.
Right.
Or not even zone residential, it could be.
Because we're in residential, we're talking about being in residential now.
Okay.
So it's not about being in a residentially zoned lot, it's that they are adjacent to a residential lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very bright like that, it's hard to see.
So I guess the question is, is 200 feet too much, which we can adjust it? We could also say in residential districts it's 200 feet, in commercial districts it's less. Hey, if you're adjacent to a residential commercial, you might be, accustomed to a little bit brighter lights. We've got this flexibility to kind of design this how it works for you, because right now, there's no reference to digital signage.
Yeah,
So in theory, they're not allowed.
yeah.
But how about the 50% rule?
I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
yeah.
I think the 200 feet's good too.
Okay. So that will give some, ability, and they also can do the manual reader boards too, if they want. They don't want to do a digital, they can do manual reader boards, but this gives them a particular option to do digital. And only on the freestanding signs, they can't do this on a building sign. I've unfortunately seen too many people who've just put an outdoor TV up and said, that's my sign, and I'm like, oh, God, no, it's not a sign, it's a TV, it's not meant to be a sign. Okay. So then we move into the non-residential districts. So this is where this is where I gave up on trying to make sense of what you do now, which Joshua's probably like, yay. So I'm gonna give you an example of how I interpret most of your commercial districts now, is that it either uses the width of the facade or the width of the lot, and it assigns some kind of calculation ratio, plus 20 feet, plus 40 feet, whatever it is, and that's how much sign area you get on your entire lot. Okay. I said, and that means that's how much you get. Let's say you're allowed to have 60 square feet. You can use that for your freestanding sign, you can use that for your building sign, mix match however you want, 60 square feet. The number one change I made is I separated out the calculation of the freestanding sign from the building sign. And I did this for one critical reason, is for any lot, particularly in your commercial districts that have multiple uses and multiple tenants, anytime one of those tenants changes their signage, you're gonna have to go back and recalculate all of the signage on the lot. Versus saying, this is how big your lot is, so this is how big your freestanding sign is, and then you never have to worry about calculating that in with the building signage. So this is it's a change for, to try to minimize administration's nightmare of recalculating everything. And then when we get to the multi-tenant buildings things, we break it up so, you know, they get something based on their tenant space. So if one tenant changes their signs, you only have to worry about that signage. You don't have to worry about looking at everybody else's signage on that lot. How you did it is, it's a way I've seen it done before, don't get me wrong. It's not like you are doing something extremely unusual. It's just from a standpoint of having administered these and having talked to a lot of communities that administer, you know, the one size, you know, this is what you get and recalculate. It hurts.
Oh, every sign company from out of this area that calls in, like, that are building,
Yeah.
the Menards, whatever, take your pick, they just start all called and say, you gotta explain this to me. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't understand what you guys are trying to do here.
Oh, I got a feel for, I mean, I definitely got a feel for how much signage you were trying to allow in the East District. But it was kind of mix or match how you did it. So sometimes it was based on how big the building was, sometimes it was based on how big the lot was.
So with this way, like if we got a strip mall and they put out their monument sign that's gonna list the 8 different
Yeah.
stores in it, we're really, when that's just built and new, is the only time we're really dealing with that section of it, and then it's just that our tenants can deal with them on filling it in.
Yes.
Yeah, that's.
So with the freestanding sign, we basically say, this is how big a freestanding sign you get. And then it's on the landlord or the property owner to figure out how they split that up.
I like that.
Okay. So the freestanding signs, we're in the business districts at this point, so they have to be set back 10 feet from the right of way and from adjacent lot lines. We universally apply the corner setback. I've got a table here that's gonna establish the maximum area and sign. They can have changeable copy. It can be manual, so the old fashioned, you know, put it up there. It can be digital. And these are the digital standards here. So beyond just the 200-foot setback from residential lots, they have to remain static for 8 seconds. That 8-second rule, I did not magically pull. That is an ODOT standard. It's always a good one to go for. This prevents it from being a movie or having motion, but it is enough to get some change as people go by. So ODOT uses this, so I've suggested you use it. So it's got to be equipped with auto dimming. Almost every one of them now, that is just an automatic thing. So what this means is at night, it actually will dim because the contrast to the ambient light changes. And then this illumination standard is something, you haven't had to deal with it now, but I will tell you, this has come and is a common practice. It actually came from the International Sign Association, who usually would be like, oh, they want really bright lights and stuff, but they have learned that this is an acceptable illumination level. And what it requires you to do is take a light meter that you can get for very inexpensively, and you walk 50 feet out from the sign at any given time of day, and you can click it. So, and because you can go, you go a little bit further away, you do the light meter to get what the ambient conditions are, and then you walk 50 feet in front of the sign, you do the same thing, and as long as there's that difference, there's a lot of complicated ways that people do with it, but I have found this is the easiest practice to deal with illumination of digital signs. Exposed sign foundations shall be constructed with finished materials such as brick, stone, or wood. Okay, let's talk about what types and signs and stuff we're allowed here. So again, keep in mind, right now, you have one calculation for total sign area that's used across the board, so I'm separating this out. So anything in this table, I've made up. But again, I have made it up based on some rationale from what I see in your current thing. So the office transitional district, that is your current office district. Right now, you allow roughly 50 square feet of total signage area in the office district. I have suggested then, an easy assumption is that half of that could be used for the freestanding sign. So a 4x6 sign, it's not very big, it's not an intense district, 6 feet in height. And no electronic message center in the office district, because again, that's a very tight use. Central Business District, I currently interpret your rules not to allow freestanding signs, so I said no freestanding signs in the Central Business District, which is not uncommon. The Neighborhood Business District and the rest of the districts, I'll talk about this ratio, which is kind of built on your current ratio, but as much as I could look, I could not find a maximum height for signage in any of those districts, so we're gonna fix that now. I have suggested that you don't allow the digital signage in the Neighborhood Business District, which is, I think, your business type 2 now. We don't have a lot of it. But in any of the other more intense, the regional business and your industrial district and the public facilities, that you could have a digital sign. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's talk about something that's easy on this table. What kind of heights of signs do you want to allow? I think in the Neighborhood Business District, it's probably not out of line to think that would be similar to the office and transitional.
I would agree with that.
But not being as familiar with what's on the ground there, I guess I would ask the question of, in your area that's kind of business, what we are thinking is neighborhood business, what heights do you think are kind of predominant?
What area are we thinking for neighborhood? I'm trying to think, cause regional's the bigger,
Yeah,
Box
regional's gonna be the
areas.
stuff out by the interstate and,
so
yeah.
kinda in between that and
Yeah.
central business. They're kinda mixed in with almost neighborhood stuff, so I would think around the same height as the office district, in my opinion. I mean, you wouldn't want a 10-foot sign, I wouldn't think.
I can do a little, estimation too, using Google Street View, just to see if we're, because I don't want to try to make like a huge number of nonconformities, because that's just going to complicate matters. But if it's a difference between like 6 feet and 8 feet, we might say, okay, well, 8 feet's fine, but. What about in the regional business districts? Now, I'm gonna throw this out because I know you have a lot of very tall pole signs out by the highway. I've seen them. We could put in a provision that the general height is one thing, and then if you are within so many feet of the highway, you can have a taller pole sign. So that's what a lot of communities do, because they don't want those really super tall pole signs usually in the kind of non-highway oriented thing. So I will throw that out before we even talk about it, but Any thoughts on that? If you're, probably one of the questions somebody wants to ask me is like, what do I usually see out there? And I see,
I like to push the taller signs closer to the highway, in my opinion. But
yeah.
Yeah,
I will say in these regional kind of areas, I see a mix of things, and some of it comes down to policy. There are communities who are just like, we're tired of seeing really tall signs, and so we're just gonna draw a line in the sand, this is as good a time as any, this is what it's gonna be.
well,
I would say that predominantly though, we're somewhere between 16 and 20 feet in height is what I see.
yeah, you know, with today's technology, you know, people using Google Maps that have everything marked on it, I don't see any need for those big highway signs anymore. And I would like to limit the height of the signs that are, you know, in that area of West High Avenue, so that we don't have a forest of signs, you know? I would like to see us go more toward monument signs, but.
Well, if you preemptively seen my question, didn't you, about where do you
Yeah.
want to say, we can say that, so
Yeah,
we can
but-
say monument. The other thing we're, you know, this is, again, is where you can get real cute with things, is you can say, you can have a very tall monument sign, because you can, or you can have a very short pole sign. So you wanna put it on a pole, that's fine, but you only get 10 feet. You wanna have a monument and a nice, you know, and we define monument as like, you've gotta have the same width, the entire thing. You know, your monument, maybe you can have 16 feet.
Because, you know, that's the entrance to the city, and I'd like to clean that up so it looks inviting and not just,
tombstones, like we've got a few now,
yeah.
and ugly.
And
things.
again, you know, using the technology, I mean, you can use GPS to take you right to where you wanna go when you're on the interstate, so,
Well, here's the other thing.
that's just me.
Here is,
The only difference is though, just say Menards, you know, I mean, they got over $100,000 in that sign. So
Yeah, oh,
It
yeah.
must be working for them or they wouldn't have put it up.
That's true.
I mean, it's working for them or they would, but I see your point, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, but I mean, they're so far back though, and you see it from a freeway. you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I was gonna play, that's why I was gonna try to play the advocate for someone that would want one of those.
well,
I understand that if you punch Menards in, you can go right to it. But if someone's going down and they're going somewhere and think, oh shoot, there's Menards, I thought I could've had to go up to Lowe's in Canton,
Right,
that sign's probably paying for itself then.
yeah.
now I will say this, because again, I'm coming at this with a lot of background from different perspectives and stuff. And I will say, obviously, there's been a lot of argument that you've got Google and Waze and everything like that, but even I am, you know, if you look through my phone, I probably have more pictures of signs than I have of anything. It's a problem I have. But I will say that even I am, you know, prone to using Waze and all that stuff, but I still use signage when I get closer, because if I'm going into an unfamiliar area, you know, where I am using like Menards or something like that, you know, too small of a sign is, yeah, I can kind of get to the street maybe if I'm lucky, but it's nice to know, oh, it's on that side of the road, or, you know, when I'm kind of coming in. So that is, one of their things is gonna be partially GPS is there to help, but it's not the solution all the time.
That's why I think maybe, back to your point of X amount of feet from an interstate or
Yeah.
highway, I think would be,
Right.
I would be okay with.
Yeah, closer to the road, lower,
Yeah, right.
further back, higher.
So the other thing that, again, sometimes it's better to make things look like you've got flexibility, but then give incentive for things. So as I was saying, the incentive for a monument sign might be you can only do a digital sign if it's a monument sign.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're still allowing the option for a pole sign if you want to do a short pole or something like that, but you're not going to get the big highway one unless you're literally right up next to the highway, and it's going to have to be landscaped, and you're going to have to do X, Y, and Z, and you don't get the digital component, so. So I'm going to just write incentivize monument. And then with the sign area on everything else on the neighborhood business, this is where I kind of went to like what I think you were getting at with your ratios now, and this is not an uncommon ratio. is that you can have 1 square foot of sign area per lineal foot of lot width.
Yeah.
So
Say that again?
the freestanding sign is based on 1-to-1 ratio of your lot width.
Okay.
Up to, I use 200 square feet because that's the maximum sign you have now. So if you have a 200 square foot lot, you can get a 200 square foot sign.
Yeah, and your GPS is
But-
200 yards.
That is entirely up to you. That's where I was trying to use some of the basis of what you have now to do this.
Well,
200
this is just the freestanding, right? So they could go, let's say a big place has, they can do 200 square feet on their freestanding sign.
Yeah,
They'll still get additional signage on
yes,
the building.
correct.
'Cause that's, I know one of our concerns was the regional business district allowing for the big box stores to get more than the 200 square foot because we're constantly going to boards and appeals.
Oh, and to be honest, they usually have an enormous amount of building signage, which for the most part tends to look proportional.
Right.
So I find that most communities don't have as big of a, an issue with the signs attached to the building as they do with the stuff up front.
I like how you're separating it, the freestanding and then.
Oh, I'm doing that so
single.
that you don't,
Yeah, that makes it a lot nicer.
you don't have to sit there with calculators and be like. So this isn't bad. Now, I do want to be upfront, and I mentioned this, and I just want to make this abundantly clear. I have not specified that this freestanding sign has to be on premise, which you do in your current code. But here's why. We haven't outright prohibited billboards, but we haven't allowed them necessarily. So you cannot have this signage on vacant, you cannot have permanent signage on a vacant lot. So you already can't do a billboard that way. And let's say your big property gets 200 square feet of a freestanding signage. If McDonald's can do, let's say McDonald's can do 100 square feet, they aren't giving it up to anybody. They're using all of that for themselves. But if you have a multi-tenant space and they want to lease off some of their sign area that they are allowed without getting more to somebody behind them because they don't have a high visibility or lot frontage, do you really care what their message says?
It just counts towards the
Correct.
property's
So-
total allowance.
So basically what I'm saying is they get 200 square feet and they can pick or choose whatever they want the message with. I mean, if they really wanted to go, if somebody had a 200 square foot building, or 200, they could do 200 square feet, as long as that's accessory, that sign is on a lot with some other use. If they want to do a billboard sign, I guess they could for whoever down the street, but that's all the signage they get. So, one, there's a reason I do this. One is before this case from 2 years ago, that was the easiest way to prohibit billboards. Is you only get freestanding signs as accessory to another use. And so you can't go over so many square feet. So you've basically outlawed billboards without saying you outlawed billboards. So I will mention that. I just want to mention that and see if everybody's okay with it. So no matter what, there will never be a new freestanding sign that goes over 200 square feet.
Wendy, say that again though, as far as, I see what you're getting at with, if it's sitting out front, someone in the rear has no visibility or no rear, as far as noticing that.
Like a lot behind them.
Yeah, right, so
yeah.
say it's just something that's 3 miles away,
Yeah.
it could be anything, right?
Yeah,
So it doesn't, it
Yeah.
could be anything,
yeah.
okay,
You're giving them the option, but you're saying, listen, all you get is this amount of signage.
I got you, all right.
And
Wanna
if
make
you-
sure I understood that,
If you choose to sell that away, that's fine, but don't come crying to us.
gotcha, okay.
Okay. The other thing I did, because you do have a kind of example of this is come in handy too. You do have some examples of big lots that have a lot of outlots in front of them. So that doesn't actually look like they have street frontage, but they actually have a lot of lot width, like a Menards or something like that. So for the purposes only of this freestanding sign provision, we've shown what lot width could be behind, like if they've got a very wide lot, they can actually use that for their signage. Or, and I don't know if you've got any examples of this, but I've seen it in communities similar to in age as New Philadelphia. On the right hand, if you've got a building that crosses over multiple lots, you are looking at, you can look at the lot with all of those lots. You aren't restricting them to very tiny, 3 very tiny, now if they wanted to, they could, but they could also look at it as one large lot, zoning lot. And then the last part, this A, landscaping, if freestanding signs, you gotta put it in the landscaping area. This is trying to keep them out of parking lots. That also would apply to our big pole sign, so, you know. But that tends to be a different situation where it's so tall, it doesn't really matter, but, okay. Moving along, building signs. So I suggest tackling any type of sign that is attached to the building as a building sign. So wall signs, projecting signs, awning signs, canopy signs, any of those things that are attached to the building, those are building signs. We're gonna give you so much square footage of building sign, and you can figure out how you wanna use it. You wanna do all wall signs, great. You wanna do a wall sign and projecting sign, fine. This is the amount of area you get. So we are giving them flexibility to pick and choose what kind of sign they want. We're just limiting them on that, so. One question I do have is, most communities prohibit roof signs, but interestingly enough, you've got a roof sign downtown. I guess the question is, do we want to figure out a way to make sure that that roof sign is conforming, or do we just say no more roof signs and?
Why are they so unpopular? Is it because of safety reasons, they can get blown off, that
I
kind
don't
of stuff?
think it's a safety
'Cause it
reason.
seems
I
like
think
every-
I think honestly, I gotta be honest here. I think people just don't like them.
Is it tacky looking kind of thing?
I don't think they're tacky. I think they can be tacky, so it's
That
one.
one don't look tacky, I'll
No,
tell you
I
that.
don't, I agree, yours don't, but I
Fight me
think,
on that one.
It
here's
just seems like every community says no.
here's why I think so,
I say we
because
just don't allow them.
It's an antique.
your sign is a great
It's great
example of a
for-
roof sign.
Yeah, true.
However, I think what has happened in other communities is somebody has taken like a really ugly piece of plywood and
Right.
just mounted it on top of their roof.
I just say we don't allow them myself.
So I think part of it is that the nice roof signs are the ones going
It
in.
is.
Yeah.
Now, again, this is one thing where we could say, in the prohibited list, we could say roof signs are prohibited unless approved as part of a PUD. So if somebody comes in, we had talked, Mayor, about like there might be a potential for a PUD near downtown. They might come in with like a very cute looking roof sign. We could make an exception where they could consider a roof sign in a PUD.
I think I'm in agreement with
Is the
Ron.
approval,
No roof
is
sign.
the approval, what's the approving body on that? Is it planning or is it zoning?
For the PUD.
Oh, it's planning commission and council.
Okay, so we're saying we're moving some of this stuff to planning commission as far as they can and getting out of the board of zoning. and PUD.
Well, so the PUD is a zoning amendment process with a development plan.
Yeah.
So they would be the recommending body to council, but council would have final say.
I don't get the point of roof signs though, like they're so, you know, even in big cities, they're so high up, who the heck sees them? Unless you're distant.
Well, so
This
yours
is
is a good example, though. You can see yours coming down.
Yeah.
You know, the
We
main
don't
street.
have big-
And one of the other ones, I can think of a few in Kansas City, and I can remember being like in a part of Kansas City that's kind of close to downtown, but enough that I was far enough away you could actually see them. Like, but they're like yours. They were meant to be done by like big companies that were done really nice and very large. And unfortunately, I think most people, what has happened is there's been too many examples of somebody just doing dumb roof signs.
Yeah.
We're like, I
And we
just heard them say-
can't say, we'll pick the roof signs because we like it. All right, so no roof signs unless you go through PUD.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, building signs in the non-residential districts. Remember, we talked about primary facades and secondary facades. This is where it's gonna come back. So what I have suggested is, again, kind of based on a ratio you have, which is not outside of the realm of common practice is that for the primary facade, for every foot of building facade you have, you get 1 square foot of signage. And that on any secondary facade, you get a half a foot. So you would have a smaller amount of signage on your secondary facades.
Mhm.
So I've suggested that. Now, this is just a good rule of thumb. Now, in the regional business, you might want to think about, you know, one of the considerations is maybe it's 1.5 because like a Walmart or Menards might push that. But the other question I had is maybe it's smaller ratios for the office and the neighborhood business district. But if you think about it, like on a Walgreens or something, you've probably got 60 feet of width, maybe 50 or 60 feet of width, so that's 50 square feet of, I mean, it's not a huge amount of signage. But this is kind of based on the ratios you're using now. Thoughts?
I mean, it definitely allows for the bigger stores to have more signage just with this formula.
Yeah. And it might be one that you say, let's go with this, and then if down the line you're still finding that you're getting a lot of variance requests, maybe that's a tweak you do in a year. But again, part of it is that most communities would prefer building signage over freestanding.
I mean, I like how it's divvied up for even freestanding to this side of the building, that side of the building. I think that's gonna help those guys. That's gonna eliminate a lot of variance requests, period, right there. But
So
I
the
can't,
secondary facade is just your one of your sides.
Yeah,
So-
we talked about that a little bit earlier. I think you walked in after it.
Yep.
So it is in a non-residential district, you get one primary facade, and then all the rest of them are secondary unless it's facing a residential district.
Gotcha, that's what wasn't throwing me off, okay.
Yeah. So a secondary facade could be a rear facade as long as it's looking out at the highway or, you
Okay.
know.
Alright,
Now, most businesses are not gonna put signage on all of them because they're gonna look at what's visible.
right.
So wanna stick with these ratios for now?
Yeah.
I
yeah,
say so.
I don't have any experience to say that's gonna work or not gonna work, you know, without going through.
Yeah.
it.
All I can tell you is this.
We're gonna trust you on this.
Well, no, so there's a couple things we can do. I can work with you and we can pick some recent ones and see
What it
what
would've
they,
came out as.
where we came out at
There
and just,
you go.
and
I
kind
think
of
that's the thing to do.
That's
all right,
yeah,
so
that's a good idea.
I will check with Joshua.
Yeah, and see where some of the ones we've done lately, and see where if that fits in the cookie cutter formula we
I
have
think
there.
this would, I think it would do most of them right offhand because, you know, the 200 square feet we're only allowing Petco to do, that's just in their freestanding sign now, plus what they get, I think, yeah. But yeah, we'll do that.
Well, and the other part of this is this one-to-one requirement for facades is not unusual at all. It is the common practice. Now, again, some communities do change it up, so the districts, like regional stuff, might get two. I'll be honest, like, it really does, it's one of those things that if you look at the average community, this is what you have. Now, I'm working on a sign code for Salina, Kansas, and I was shocked at they allow 3 feet for every 1 foot in their downtown.
Wow.
And I thought that too. I went, wow. And then I saw their downtown and I'm like, lovely signs. Like, not like I was like, okay. Because they had this one huge sign and I'm like, how did you get that sign? But it was a huge building. And so it ended up like, I was like, okay, you've sold me. So it's kind of one of those things. I say we just let's spot check because we may up this a little bit. But this may be one to just kind of see how it plays out. The other thing is, we did not talk about we've talked about signage downtown. When we got to the design guidelines we spoke about last time with downtown, we did not talk about color. But I do know that color has come up a lot about discussions in the downtown signage. So I guess the question is, should we put a little bit of guidance in here about
Yes.
not having neon? And I just wrote a design guideline for a historic district. And I actually put in a range of colors that when we say neon, these are examples of it. And when we say highly saturated colors, like very bright reds, this is what we need. And it's just a range of colors that's like, this is what we're talking about. It's kind of a guideline more than anything. So, I mean, I could put that in there, specific for downtown.
Yeah, do that,
I think that would be a key because of the downtown design board,
yeah.
they would like that.
Yeah, I'll have to look to see if we want to, I may end up putting it in the downtown design standards and guidelines, just because that's what they're gonna be focusing on when they
Right.
do the review.
That's
And
what,
rather than having it here
yeah,
in the
that's what I'm
sense.
getting at, maybe
Yeah.
that's where it fits,
Okay,
okay?
yep. All right, so as I said, we might adjust these square footages, but one way or another, we'll have a square footage, and this is just for building signs. So, building signs include wall signs, projecting signs, awning signs, canopy signs, marquee signs, and the like. So if you do a wall sign, we have this provision about, like, it's gotta be no more than 12 inches from the wall or face of the building. If it's on a raceway, which I don't know how many of you know what a raceway is, but like channel letters, sometimes they put a bar behind the sign and then attach them to
Hook them all together,
yeah, so that it's not bolted multiple places in the facade. That's a raceway. So if you put it on a raceway, you could have 18 inches. I have prohibited cabinet signs in the CBD. And that's a policy change, I think, because you don't specify now, but those are literally internally illuminated cabinet signs.
Right.
We're not prohibiting internal illuminated sign. If they want to do channel letters, so individual letters that are illuminated, that's fine, but you can't have one big cabinet. I may have to add some images here.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah. Awnings, I have pictures in, like, this is what an awning sign is, this is the canopy sign in the definition, so. Awning, canopy, and marquee signs, obviously they're attached to those kind of thing. No more than 50% of any awning or such can be signage. A sign can be mounted above a canopy as long as it doesn't go above the roof line of the building, and I explained this, the reason why is canopies tend to be over entrances, and the cool trend right now is to have signage that, like individual letter signage mounted above it. The most common one you're gonna see is Home of the Whopper, above the entry to Burger King, but a lot of hotels are also doing that. So the sign itself doesn't go above the roof of the building, but it is mounted above that thing. So this is saying, that's fine, you can do that. And then projecting signs. So this is where we have added an allowance for projecting signs. One projecting sign is allowed per tenant, so you don't get to have a whole bunch of projecting signs. It's got to be perpendicular to the wall, and it cannot extend more than 4 feet from the wall. They've got to have 6 inches of clearance from the facade of any building, so the actual sign component can, if it swings a little bit. Decorative supporting structures are encouraged and should not count towards the maximum square footage, but shouldn't be more than 6 square feet. So the reason we put this in is to hopefully provide some incentive to do something really cute with the mounting brackets. I have seen bike signs where they have a little bike that's used to mount that. You know, go ahead and do that. We're not going to count that against you, but you only get a certain amount of square footage. The maximum sign area for projecting signs 6 square feet, so you don't get we're not allowing huge projecting signs. Now, this is a question because one, I couldn't think of what was out there now, but this would still not accommodate things like what are sometimes they're projecting signs, but sometimes referred to as blade signs, old theater signs that, are, this deep, like 4 feet deep, and like go up the length of the building.
Right.
If you want to allow those, I would have to adjust this type of thing. But a lot of times those end up being cabinet signs too. So it's kind of like, what kind of signs do you want to allow projecting from the facade? Are you talking about the cute little swing kind, or do you want to allow something more extensive?
I wish more of the downtown board,
Yeah.
or any of them were here.
We can pose, I can pose some questions for
Pose
them.
some questions for them, yeah.
I still think a meeting with them is necessary you know, since they get so many more rules and a lot of these downtown, they want input on.
I think we were gonna try to do a meeting with them. I'll talk to you about
Yeah.
zooming in with them or something one time. Because one of the revisions I've been, working through on the rest of the code is we're setting them up to essentially, potentially in the future, being part of a historic preservation light, where we can designate local districts and stuff like that. We're setting it up that they could do that, not necessarily that they will. So it's probably good to kind of give them that heads up. Okay. Window signage. Window signs are not clearly regulated by the current code. And I put it in, I put it in here because a lot of communities do regulate them. Not necessarily permit or otherwise, although that's a question. And I do have a lot of communities who want to permit for the same reason we talked about the panel change. So I have added this in here. Window signs, while I get it, are attached to the building. I do not calculate as part of the building signage. Because in part, a lot of them nowadays, like at Taco Bell and stuff, are like temporary. They're the cling wraps.
Yeah.
So I've tried to give you something that's pretty common, is that 50% of a window can be covered with signage.
Yeah, we have tiendas around town, and, in Guatemala, they must allow you to just plaster everything on the windows. Well, I'd like to discourage that, and we're gonna have a bigger tienda downtown. Inspirations is closing, and the tienda across the street is moving over there, and I really don't wanna see those big windows plastered with, their,
Across from Tuscross Insurance.
Well, that may be another good,
Yeah.
that also may be another good, is it downtown?
it's downtown.
It may be another good
Which
guideline
one's
for
that
downtown, that
Yeah,
regardless
across
if
the
it's
Tuscross
sign or
Insurance,
not, that you
White
can't cover your
Across the
window
street.
area more than 50% with anything.
Yeah.
Like, because you really want that transparency on the
Well,
first floor.
yeah, and,
Yeah, they're gonna have a lot.
God bless them, I mean, that's how you advertise in Guatemala, but,
God bless them.
it just doesn't fit downtown, guys.
Especially color-wise, that's.
Cause I think right now, I better watch on Josh on this, if it's behind a window.
Yeah, but I think you can do anything inside the store, right?
And we say that, so if you're in, so to me, a window sign is anything that is actually attached to the window, or if it is mounted in a way where it's visible, it's meant to be seen from the outside. So bar signs that are like Bud Light signs that are mounted up against the window but not touching, that's window signage. If you're looking in at a bar, and let's say the windows are here, and you're sitting at the bar there, if the window signage is like up against that wall so that it's meant to be seen internally, we don't care about that.
Right, okay.
So that's, window signage is defined, whether it's attached or not attached to the window, if it's meant to be seen through the window from the outside.
Gotcha. Yeah, cause the mayor's right, everybody sitting here knows how those are when they are, they just plaster them with everything.
Oh, yeah.
And it'd just be, you won't even be able to see in the place practically. Seems like you can never even see in them.
Okay. Well, and this may, again, I think that's another design guideline we can probably easily add, that we don't care if it's curtains or whatever, we want to be able to, we want transparency
Yeah.
of windows
Exactly.
downtown. That's, again, not an uncommon thing. And then the final piece of this, which again, I did not see you address, is driveway signs, which is right above temporary signs. These don't count as anything else. Driveway signs are enter, exit, drive-through, whatever. This just allows these in the non-residential districts. We don't count those as freestanding sign. They're little signs. They have to meet the driveway intersection type of thing, which is not, it doesn't take that much to avoid that. But this would allow for small signs that are in close proximity to like entry driveways.
Was we counting them, Josh?
Nah, we always call them incidental. A lot of the sign companies will ask. We're just talking like,
Enter,
Trucks on over here,
exit, drive-through.
Yeah, we had them whenever we did, but the only thing that, what I remember on them, it was more of a, make sure they was back as far as for the site. I don't think but I thought At one time, Josh, we had them as, we maybe not have, I can't remember if we added them to form or to add as like, okay, was it 1 by 1 or 1 foot, but go ahead, I mean, whatever you're doing with them.
Well, and you could say, so this is one where you could say, we don't require a permit for them, but this is where we allow them. This is one that I find most permit, just from the standpoint of trying to make sure they're not in the driveway visibility intersection. That kind of thing.
That's all we ever really, that's really the only thing we ever governed off of was a sight, you know, line of sight
Right.
low enough or this kind of thing.
But you don't, I guess the question is, do you want them to come in and get a certificate or not?
We've never done it, you know, included.
We always make them mark it on the thing though. We always did make them mark
Just
it
to
on.
show
the-
where they're at.
Yeah, show where they're at, but did we ever have a, you know, come in and put,
No,
no,
we've kind of treated them like menu boards and stuff. They're just kind of part of the business's
Okay.
yeah, we never really
operation
made
type
them
thing.
count as anything, but we needed to mark them because we had to make them move them back or forward, whatever the site was.
So here's
Line
what
of sight.
here's what I would suggest as an additional provision we put in here. We can move this to the exempt from the certificate requirement, but I would put in a note at the beginning of that exemption is these signs may be exempt, but if they are being proposed as part of a larger project, you know, a new build or whatever, that they need to be illustrated on the site plan as part of the
Yep.
requirement. So you may not need an individual certificate for them, but we want to know where they are on a larger site plan.
Right,
Okay.
right, right. Because the shops at Bluebell is a good spot for that, you know. It's
Yeah.
a larger plan, but then it has the, you know,
Arrows.
in or exit.
We've even had like Freeport Press call to see if, like their unloading sign, you know, they put more professional looking ones up
Yeah.
and stuff like that. We never counted toward, because they weren't advertising for business, it was.
Yeah, just shipping,
Yeah.
receiving, yep.
All right, well, we're about 15 minutes from the end of this, so I'm going to do a couple things because I would kind of prefer Marvin to be here for this conversation. So, but I do want to talk about temporary signs. So I mentioned in the precursor of this meeting that temporary signs is where the struggle is real with this, we can't regulate content. Because this is where most content-based regulations are. We regulate real estate contractor, subdivision, you know, sale signs and stuff. So this is where it gets to be a little bit challenging. And there's two approaches to how communities are regulating temporary signs nowadays. And so I've given both options for us to have a discussion with, and this is again where I'd like Marvin to kind of chime in to say where he feels comfortable with defending the city. And since we have to do a little bit more research, we can always just follow up and start with temporary signs next time after we've talked to them. But I will go over for your future reading here. The two approaches are this. One is the content neutral. We do not talk about what the message is on the temporary sign. We tell you what kind of sign you can have, we tell you how many you can have, and that's the end of it. So the way this happens is in a residential district and on a residential lot, you can have up to 36 square feet of sign. So that could be, if you want to do one of the, you know, you could do up to 6 signs at any one time. Do I know that during political season, they're going to put up a lot more? Yes. But we usually have to put some kind of number in there. So what happens is the enforcement officers are just like, I don't see this unless somebody's complaining. It's an unfortunate situation. But if we put 3 signs in, I know we're going to get in trouble with the courts. We just don't know how many signs you can have. You could allow more. I have said that each individual sign in a residential district can be 6 square feet. So that's all the little signs. You would not be allowing the big plywood size signs. Now you may say, go ahead and allow them to have a 32 square foot sign, 4 by 8, but they get one of that and then 1 4 square foot sign, but that's their choice. So you don't have to answer me now. I just want you to understand some of the things we can change in this. So we can allow more signage. We can allow, I don't want to allow a lot less. We can change the maximum square footage of it. But you can tell this is the safest from a legal challenge standpoint, right? But it's a nightmare from an enforcement standpoint because come this fall, it's all hell's gonna break loose on temporary signage. I just know it. Okay, and then with non-residential districts, we have a similar allowance that this is, there's no time restriction because again, you have the right to talk about whatever you want year-round, and we're not gonna try to tie this to elections. But in the commercial district, on the far right corner, what we said is there are instances where you can have some additional signage 2 weeks out of every quarter. So now hiring signs, special sales signs, contractor signs, whatever, now open, grand opening signs, you can do that. And those could be 36 square feet at a pop or, that kind of thing. Again, don't care about the message. The alternative, which I think most enforcement officers prefer, and some attorneys are okay with and some are not, is this. We glance at a sign, and it's either a commercial sign or a non-commercial sign, and we don't go any further. So a non-commercial sign would be political, a religious opinion, anything that has nothing to do with commercial activity. And that is regulated by number 3 here. We basically keep it out of the right-of-way, no bigger than 32 square feet, we're not gonna, no bigger than 6 feet high, we're not gonna get into the number, we're just whatever. The reason being is this. One, during political season, it's gonna get crazy, you're gonna have a lot. But 98% of the time, most people self-regulate their signage, right? So they're gonna put a lot of signage out during political season and take it out. So by doing this, you're saying, listen, we get it, go forth and do it. We're not gonna worry about this is not problematic. And so that way, Joshua and any enforcement officers out there aren't pulling political signs.
Getting
'Cause
shot
you're-
at.
Huh?
Getting shot at.
Yeah, so, but then we have separate regulations for commercial signage. So that's where this is. So then in a residential district, we can say at any given time, you can have 2 temporary commercial signs. Each could be 6 square feet. So that could be a real estate sign, a garage sale sign, a community event sign, anything you can reasonably think about that would be commercial activity. Contractor sign. Keep it in good shape, you get 2 of them. And then non-residential year-round, you would do the same thing, 2 signs. So again, a lot of times the multi-tenant, like big multi-tenants always have a now leasing sign out. They could have that year-round. Keep it maintaining and stuff like that. And then again, you could have some additional special signage per the quarter, so you could have a bigger sign. So this one keeps the enforcement officers a little sane. It keeps you from pulling people's political signs because they have too much. And but it also prevents somebody from being cute and having the maximum amount of now or grand opening signs. I always get, my Kroger's just reopened and they have 10 feather signs out there that all say now open. And it's like, I get it, thank you. So this tends to be the preferred approach, but obviously there's a little bit of content in that. And that's where I need Marvin to chime
Yes.
in to say whether or not he would even accept this until, and now it's all well and good until somebody challenges it. So if, nobody challenges, it's fine. But I think from an enforcement thing, this is easier. Because you're telling people, you have all the free speech you want, but when it gets into the commercial realm, we have a statement. Now, the reason why some communities are using this, and just if you want to understand the legal precedent of this, is the case that threw everybody up for a loop is called Reed versus Town of Gilbert, happened in 2015. It's the one that said, oh my gosh, you can't really read the content of signs and regulate them. However, it didn't speak to previous cases where there were opinions of the Supreme Court. And there's a previous case that everybody had long stuck to, which is you can make distinctions between a commercial sign and a non-commercial sign, as long as you are more, either treated them equally or were more hands-off on the non-commercial. So as long as things like political signage and opinion and religious signage got better treatment or equal treatment, you were okay. So that is what this is based on, is that saying, fingers crossed, if it ever goes back to Supreme Court, they're gonna say, no, that was a reasonable distinction. Okay? So I'm not just saying we're willing to take a risk that, you know, we don't know what they're gonna do. There is legal precedence for this, we just don't know how it's gonna play out now. Okay? So here is what I would suggest, is that we're already on schedule for the April meeting, the regular April meeting, so we will come back and finish talking about signs and the subdivision. I will confer with Joshua before that on spot checking some recent signage, so we can answer the question of how much building signage to allow. We'll see if we can, maybe, can we coordinate a design review
Yep,
before that? Even
yep,
if I zoom in?
yeah.
So we'll do that. So that means that the April meeting will finish things up, and that will push our final planning commission review meeting to May, which is on my calendar and all good.
That's when we're gonna kinda, any questions on that?
Yeah, well, that one where I actually will probably, in the next couple of weeks, send out a full code and the zoning map, so we can already kind of looking at it. I'm not giving you just a couple days to read a full code, but it will be redlined, so it'll show all the changes we have talked about to date. So we might do, if we do that planning commission in May and we're good to go, I would push for a big public meeting at the beginning of June, and then and then maybe that's what we'll do. Maybe we do if we target a public presentation on this in the beginning of June, if we don't create a massive controversy, which I'm, fingers crossed, we're actually making things better, we could be in front of the planning commission in June. So we could go, like, aim for an early June public presentation and get this on the agenda for planning commission in June.
Well, let me see, the first council meeting in June is, hold on a second, June 10th.
Well,
They're meeting the 10th and the 24th. Excuse me.
well, it wouldn't be, I mean, council, unless we want to do the public meeting and presentation of this without it being adoption at the council meeting, it's not necessarily tied. But I'm saying the adoption process, if we go to, June 11th is the planning commission.
Yeah,
I mean, if we put that on the agenda for June 11th for the adoption, then it probably, the first reading would be June 24th.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll work.
All right, well, let's keep that in mind, because that would probably put you at adoption sometime in July.
Mm-hmm.
We're not trying to rush this or sneak this by anybody. One of the things I will do when we are ready to kind of really broadcast all of these changes is I will be summarizing what changes we made, because I do want to emphasize that actually the biggest intent was to make things more clear and like, we're not
Exactly.
trying to super regulate anybody or
No,
change.
just remove the gray.
Yeah. Okay. We have a schedule and a direction.
Sweet. Bill Gates decided to update his computer.
So what do the cities do with like, it's gotta be this property keeps coming to mind in Dover, next to us, so it doesn't, but he's got 50 signs in his front yard about how our government's slimy and this and that. So I mean, to me, if I'm John McFadden over there and they say, he's only allowed having 2 signs, go knock on his door, he's getting shot at, for sure. So, I mean, like, we can regulate stuff like that? Or is that freedom of speech when they've got that many, because it's not advertising a business, but he's talking about.
So
how
it
bad
depends on the method of which we regulate temporary signs. If we go with the second approach, which is commercial versus non-commercial, yes, he would be allowed to have all that signage year-round, as long as it's being maintained. Like, you know, once it starts fluttering and, you know, you can go after him for not maintaining his signage. But he would be allowed to have that, because free speech is year-round.
Right.
If we went with the approach where we went 100% content neutral and we limit it, if we went with the draft I showed you, it would be, you get six square foot signs.
Man, we got a nice mixture in this area of NIMBYs
Yeah.
and redneck freedom fighters.
Oh, no, I get it. I get it. And part of it, here, this is the balance I know which approach is preferred from the standpoint of
I'll need some
reasonableness.
Kevlar vest for that.
Because again, 98% of people self-regulate. Like
Right.
98% are not.
Yeah,
that-
and these
you-
these are rare
right.
exceptions.
And so it's like we're not trying to be overly, kind of thing, but we also don't want to get into nitpicking things when it does get out of hand for everybody. I mean, I guarantee the November election, right before that, like everybody's going to have more than 36 square feet.
Right.
So, you also have to deal with that.
But like you said, most people self-regulate, within a week, they take it down.
However, that's not how the Supreme Court looks at regulations, right? And so then the other side of things is the attorneys who are like, I don't want to get sued on First Amendment, things. Because then now we're out money.
Yeah.
I mean, that Reed case, I don't know if I've mentioned that to you, Reed, because it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The town of Gilbert, Arizona is on the hook to pay Pastor Reed
All
his legal fees,
legal fees.
which is like close to $1 million. Salina, Kansas, I'm updating their sign code right now, and almost like the day after I left, they got sued on signage, and it's a First Amendment thing, and so, we're like, great, of course.
We don't have, that one on Tusk was probably the only one that you mentioned that I see.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just the people in this area, it's very possible one could spring up next week.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna happen no matter who wins the presidential race in November. You're gonna see those flags pop up again.
Oh, yeah.
It is-
This guy in Dover, it's up all the time. I like by shenanigans going out 800 when you first get into Dover.
Oh, yeah.
He keeps adding more and more. He's got wooden, I mean, his whole front yard's starting to, it's all about anti-government stuff.
Yeah.
So, but that's also where you go after them from the sign type. So that's why we have to be very careful, like when we say temporary signs, we are allowing yard signs, and we are allowing banner signs, and we are allowing this. So if he starts putting up huge, like almost permanent wood signs that are bigger than what we allow, then you go
That's a
after him.
route you could go after.
Because it's not about the contact or the message then, it's about, we allow you to have free speech, but it is under these types of sign types. So that's the whole time, place, and manner. You have the ability to say what types of signs he can have. I mean, if he painted his entire house, you could go after him because he's got wall signs. And you don't allow wall signs over 2 square feet.
See, that's something that's, we have anything painted, we didn't count for permits, because the code administrator before me looked into stuff, whether, is that art? Because some people will make that argument that it's art.
So murals and public art are a form of a message. That is the Salina, Kansas example. They're being sued on a mural because, it is a mural, but it's commercial design. So the way they had been doing it is if it was a art mural versus a commercial signage, painted wall sign, they had different rules.
And that, well, that makes sense, because I mean, if artwork's easy to tell, and if it's a business, if it's Napa, and they
Is
paint
it
Napa
easy to
on the
tell?
sign- Well, I mean.
What if the donut store paints a big donut?
Oh, okay.
It's,
Is that advertising or is it art?
there are court cases of, and actually you would look at them and go, those are beautiful signs. So your New Philadelphia sign is technically a government sign, it's lovely. But there's a court case on one, I forget what the name of it is, but it was a doggy daycare. And on the back side of their building, which was visible down a street, they painted pictures, lovely pictures of dogs. There was nothing that said it was a daycare, it was just dogs and paw prints, it was cute. Nope, that was a sign. So in Salina, one of the solutions we were already talking about when they got sued, which is the funny thing, is that we had a discussion is that, let's think about this from a common standpoint. Most building owners aren't gonna let you just go paint willy-nilly on the side of their buildings, right? So we said, you know what? This Charlotte, North Carolina did this, we're like, well, let's give it a shot. We said, as long as it's not on a street frontage,
Why there was nothing in there.
you can fully paint your side and rear buildings with whatever. We don't care if it's commercial, we don't care if it's non-commercial. Art, whatever, have at it. It doesn't count against your signage. And they're like, eh, let's give it a shot. Because at this point, it's not worth the argument, and really, what's the chance of somebody doing something really gnarly looking because the property owner is like, I don't care what you do. No, they care.
Right.
And they were like, if anything, it's probably gonna make things look nicer.
Well, we're starting to get it, I like it, you know, over the last few years, all the murals coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they're by very talented artists.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not,
Well.
Well, and the one thing, they have a big, like, Hamilton, Ohio has their big Spark Festival, which is mural based. Salina has Boom Salina, and it's, you know, thing, and they were like, we don't wanna stop this.
Right,
And honestly, we just don't want this on the frontage of buildings. So the case where they're getting sued was a situation where the guy had, apparently he's a precursor to White Castle, called Cozy Inn. It's a big famous case now, my name keeps popping up in the papers because of it. But downtown Salina, which is a lovely downtown like yours, it's a very narrow building, like 25 feet wide, it's very narrow, but it's the entire block deep.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have been that.
And then
Like,
next to them is a
she's got
parking
her
lot.
knees bothering her. He's gotta take
So
her
you can
to the
see the entire side, blank side of this building. And he
Nice
went to,
job, Wendy.
thank you, nice job, see you next week. Painted, was started,
That's what.
he didn't know what he was, he knew what he was doing. On a Friday night, had his muralist come in and start painting a sign. And they stopped him Monday. And this has become the challenge, because it's actually being well done, but it doesn't fit their definition.
yeah.
But they were like, I mean, it's really not a bad addition, why wouldn't we just let him do it?
right. Cause I've had the argument, well, it hasn't happened, but the what if question, well, we're not adding a sign cabinet, we're not adding a structure, the building's already there, you know, why do I need to?
Can I paint it? Yeah.
Right,
And it
which
could
I
be,
understand both
this could
ways.
be one of those things where you're like, have at it, but we limit the colors of it. Again, downtown, if we say no signs can have
Yeah.
neon color,
And that's something that the design review board would have to approve.
Which are our artists.
which, again, here's the risk, I will tell you on that, you can have them go through design review, but they can't make a decision based on the message. So if somebody were to come in, and I don't think this would happen, but it will some point, somebody were to come in and present a beautiful sign, like well done, you know, had an artist do it, that said, New Philadelphia sucks. And they said no because of the message, you're in trouble. So they would have to be trained that they are looking at the materials and the location.
What if it's a mural and not a sign?
A mural is a sign, according to